You may be spending good money on your garden and still getting beds that fall apart every season without even realizing why. I see people buying expensive soil and healthy seedlings, but they leave the edges of their garden beds open, and after a few heavy rains, the soil slowly washes away. The paths become uneven and weeds creep in from every side. That little mistake costs more than most people think because every year they end up adding more soil, pulling more weeds, and spending more time fixing something that could have been avoided from the beginning. I made the same mistake many years ago, and I kept thinking the answer was better fertilizer or stronger plants, until an older neighbor quietly smiled and told me I was looking at the wrong problem. Once I changed the borders around my beds, everything else became easier, and today I want to show you exactly why. I am not here to tell you that everyone needs to spend a fortune on fancy garden edging because that simply is not true. Some of the strongest and longest lasting borders I've ever used were made from things that other people were ready to throw away. At the same time, I have also tried expensive edging that looked beautiful and stayed in place for many years, so I learned that every garden and every budget can have a good solution if you know where to look. That is what I want to share with you today because I do not want you to waste money repeating the same mistakes that I made. By the end of this video, you will see 5 different garden bed borders. Some cost very little because they are built from simple materials that many people already have at home. Others are more expensive but can last for years with very little care. I will tell you what worked for me, what did not work, and where most people make the biggest mistake without even noticing it. Very few gardeners pay attention to one small detail before they install any border, and that detail often decides whether the edging stays straight for years or starts leaning after the first winter. An old friend showed me this trick a long time ago, and I still use it every single season because it saves both time and effort. Before we get to the first border, I want you to keep one simple thought in mind. A garden bed is not only about growing vegetables, it is also about making every job easier from watering to weeding to harvesting. Once you understand that idea, the first border I am about to show you will make much more sense, and it may surprise you because it is probably not the one you expect. The first border I want to talk about is also the one that surprises people the most because almost nobody believes that something so simple can last for years. I am talking about ordinary wooden boards. Many people immediately think they will rot in a season or two and that they are not worth the effort. That can happen if you simply place untreated boards directly on wet ground and hope for the best. That is exactly where most people make the mistake. The old gardener who first showed me this method never rushed the job, and he always said that the few extra minutes you spend at the beginning can save you many hours later. I still remember watching him collect leftover boards from an old fence and even pieces from shipping pallets that other people had thrown away. He was not looking for perfect lumber because he knew that the secret was in how the boards were prepared and installed. Before placing them around the bed, he brushed off loose dirt, let the wood dry well, and gave it a simple protective coating that slowed down moisture without making the project expensive. Then he dug a shallow trench instead of placing the boards on top of the soil. Very few people do this even today. Once the bottom of the board sat slightly below ground level, the soil itself helped hold everything firmly in place. He added a few sturdy stakes every few feet and fastened the boards to them so nothing could move when the ground became soft after heavy rain. The difference was easy to see after the first season. The bed stayed neat, the soil remained where it belonged, and mowing around the garden became much easier because the edges were straight and clear. I copied that method in my own garden, and I quickly realized I was spending less time repairing washed-out corners and pulling weeds from the paths. Another thing that many gardeners forget is the height of the border. People often build walls that are much taller than necessary because they think higher always means better. In my experience, a modest height is usually enough to keep soil in place while still allowing rainwater to flow naturally. That simple choice also saves materials and money. If you already have leftover boards in your shed or know someone replacing an old fence, this border can cost almost nothing. Even if you buy new wood, it is still one of the most affordable options, and it can look surprisingly attractive with very little effort. But before you decide that wooden boards are the best answer for every garden, there is another border that costs almost nothing at all, and many people walk past the materials for it every single day without realizing what they are leaving behind. Dot. The next border taught me something that I never expected because for years I walked past the materials without giving them a second look. One afternoon I noticed an old pile of tree branches stacked near the edge of a property after some pruning had been done. Most people would have seen nothing more than yard waste waiting to be hauled away. An older gardener looked at that same pile and smiled because he saw a free supply of garden borders. That was the day I learned that one of the oldest forgotten methods is often one of the cheapest and most satisfying to build with your own hands. Thin branches from willow hazel dogwood or other flexible trees can become a strong woven border that holds soil surprisingly well when it is built carefully. Many people believe this style belongs only in old country gardens, but I have found that it works just as well in a modern vegetable patch if you take your time. The first step is choosing branches that still have some flexibility because dry, brittle wood is much harder to weave and breaks more easily. Then I drive sturdy wooden stakes into the ground, every short distance around the bed. Most people make the mistake of leaving too much space between the stakes, and later wonder why the border begins to lean. I learned many years ago that closer spacing makes the whole structure much stronger without adding much work. Once the stakes are in place, I weave each branch in front of one stake and behind the next until the pattern begins to lock itself together. After only a few rows, the border starts to feel surprisingly solid, and every new branch makes it stronger. Very few gardeners still use this method today, and that is a shame because it costs almost nothing if you already have access to trimmed branches. Another small trick that was shown to me years ago is to press each new row down firmly with a piece of scrap wood or a rubber mallet. That closes the gaps and creates a cleaner, stronger edge that lasts much longer. What I enjoy most about this border is not only the money it saves, but also the way it blends naturally into the garden. It never looks out of place, and every season it seems to fit the vegetables even better. Friends often ask where I bought it, and they are surprised when I tell them it came from branches that would otherwise have been burned or thrown away. Still, this style is not the right choice for everyone because some gardeners want a border that can last much longer with almost no maintenance. The next one surprised me even more because it uses a material that many people already have stacked behind the garage and never imagined could become one of the strongest garden bed borders they will ever build. The third border changed the way I looked at old building materials because for many years I thought broken bricks and leftover concrete blocks were nothing more than heavy clutter taking up space behind the garage. Then one season I needed a border that would stay in place for many years without worrying about replacing rotten wood or weaving new branches. A friend who had been gardening much longer than I had looked at my pile of old bricks and told me that I was already looking at the answer. Most people make one simple mistake when they build a brick border because they place the bricks directly on loose soil and expect everything to stay level. After one winter, the ground shifts a little and the whole edge begins to lean or separate. That is why so many people think brick borders do not work, when in reality the problem is not the bricks at all. The old method that was shown to me begins with a narrow, shallow trench that follows the exact shape of the bed. I level the bottom as well as I can and add a thin layer of compacted gravel or coarse sand. Very few gardeners take this extra step because they want to finish quickly, but those few minutes make a remarkable difference. Once the base is firm, the bricks sit much more evenly and rain has far less chance to move them. I usually place the bricks close together and check every few pieces with a simple board to make sure the top stays even. It is not about making everything perfect, because a garden should feel natural, but keeping the line steady gives the entire bed a clean appearance. One thing I especially like is that damaged bricks work just as well as perfect ones. Small chips and worn corners disappear once the border is finished, and that means you can often collect materials for free from renovation projects or neighbors who no longer need them. I have even mixed old red bricks with concrete pavers, and the result looked far better than I expected. Another small trick I learned years ago is to leave tiny openings every so often if the bed is on a slope, because that allows heavy rain to drain gently instead of pushing against one section of the border. Few people think about that until they see water pooling after a storm. This border takes a little more effort than the first two, but once it is finished, the maintenance is almost nothing. And every year it seems to look even better as the plants soften the edges. But if you think brick is the strongest option, you may be surprised because the next border costs more than the homemade ones. Yet it solves a problem that many gardeners struggle with every single season, and very few people install it correctly the first time. The fourth border is the first one on my list that usually costs a little more money, but after living with it for several seasons, I finally understood why so many experienced gardeners are willing to pay for it. I am talking about quality metal garden edging. Years ago, I thought it was just another product that looked good in catalogs, but offered very little real value. I could not have been more wrong. The biggest mistake most people make is buying the cheapest thin metal they can find, because they assume every metal border is the same. After one or two winters, the thin material begins to bend, the top edge becomes uneven, and the whole border loses its neat appearance. The older gardener who first recommended this method told me something I never forgot. He said it is often better to buy one strong border that lasts for many years than replace a weak one again and again. That advice has saved me money more than once. What impressed me most was how clean the finished beds looked without drawing attention away from the vegetables. The border quietly did its job while keeping the soil exactly where I wanted it. Another old trick that very few people talk about is installing the edging slightly deeper than you think is necessary. Most gardeners leave too much metal sticking above the ground because they believe a taller edge will hold the soil better. In reality, a lower profile often looks better and creates a stronger hold because more of the edging is anchored below the surface. I always take my time pressing the soil firmly back against both sides after installation because that simple step helps lock everything into place. It does not require special skills and it does not take very long, but many people skip it and later wonder why sections begin to shift. One of the biggest advantages I noticed was how much easier it became to keep grass from creeping into the vegetable beds. Before using this type of border, I spent hours cutting unwanted grass that slowly invaded from the lawn. After installing the edging, that problem became much smaller, and regular maintenance took far less time. That alone made the investment worthwhile for me. I also appreciate that metal edging works well with almost any style of garden, whether it is simple and practical or carefully planned for appearance. It blends into the background instead of becoming the main attraction. Of course, not everyone wants to spend money on metal, and I completely understand that because some of my favorite borders cost almost nothing. Still, there is one final option that combines a finished professional look with excellent durability, and there is one small installation detail that most people completely overlook, even though it often decides whether the border stays beautiful for many years or becomes another disappointment after the first hard season. The fifth and final border is the one many people admire when they visit a well-kept garden, because it gives every bed a finished look that stays attractive for years. I am talking about natural stone, or good quality concrete stone edging. At first, I believed this option was only for large, expensive gardens because that is how it often appears in magazines and garden centers. Then I discovered that many homeowners sell leftover stones after building a patio or walkway, and sometimes they are happy just to clear the space. That changed the way I looked at this material because with a little patience, you can often find enough pieces without spending nearly as much as you might expect. The biggest mistake people make is choosing stones only because they look nice without thinking about how they fit together. I learned many years ago that flatter stones with reasonably even surfaces are much easier to work with, and they create a border that feels solid from the very beginning. Before placing the first stone, I prepare a shallow trench, just as I do with brick borders. A thin layer of compacted gravel helps spread the weight and keeps the stones from sinking unevenly after heavy rain or winter frost. Very few people bother with this simple step because they want quick results, but it is one of those forgotten habits that makes the difference between a border that lasts for years and one that constantly needs repair. As I place each stone, I gently rock it into position instead of forcing it down. That little movement helps it settle naturally and creates better contact with the base underneath. Another small secret that an older gardener shared with me was to step back every few stones and look at the entire border instead of focusing only on the piece in your hands. It sounds almost too simple, but it helps you notice small changes in height or direction before they become obvious problems. I still do that today, and it saves me from having to take sections apart later. What I enjoy most about stone edging is that every season it seems to become part of the garden itself. Flowers soften the edges, vegetables grow right beside it, and after a while it no longer feels like something that was installed. It simply belongs there. Maintenance is also very easy because once the stones are properly seated, there is very little to adjust from year to year. Whether your budget allows for expensive stone or only simple reclaimed materials, the lesson remains the same. The strength of a garden border does not come from the price alone. It comes from careful preparation and a few old methods that many people have forgotten. There is one final thought that completely changed the way I look at every garden project, and that is exactly what I want to leave you with next. When I look back at all the years I've spent working in my garden, I realize that the biggest improvements did not come from expensive tools or complicated ideas. They came from simple changes that made every season a little easier than the one before. A good garden border is one of those changes. It keeps the soil where it belongs. It helps reduce weeds along the edges. It makes watering more predictable because the beds hold their shape. It also makes harvesting more pleasant because the paths stay cleaner and easier to walk on. That may not sound exciting at first, but after a full growing season, the difference becomes easy to see. If you already have old boards, branches, bricks, or other materials at home, I would encourage you to start there, instead of feeling that you must buy everything new. Many of my favorite projects began with something that another person was ready to throw away. I have learned that saving money and building something useful with my own hands brings just as much satisfaction as growing a basket full of fresh vegetables. If your budget allows you to invest in metal or stone edging, then that can also be a wonderful choice because those materials can serve you well for many years when they are installed carefully. The important thing is not choosing the most expensive option. The important thing is choosing the border that fits your garden, your time, and your budget. I still remember the advice that was given to me many years ago. Do one small improvement each season instead of trying to change everything at once. That simple habit kept gardening enjoyable instead of turning it into hard work. Before long, those small improvements added up to a garden that was easier to care for and far more rewarding to spend time in. I hope that one of these 5 borders gives you an idea you can use in your own yard, because even one simple change can save hours of work over the coming years. Very few people realize how much easier gardening becomes once the beds have clear, strong edges that stay in place through rain, heat, and changing seasons. Thank you for spending some time with me today and sharing this quiet moment in the garden. I always enjoy passing along the old practical methods that have helped me over the years because simple ideas have a way of lasting the longest. In the next video, I want to share another group of forgotten garden tricks that still work today, and I think a few of them may surprise you just as much as these borders did when I first discovered them.